Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Tracy Dolan. I'm the Deputy Commissioner here at the Department of Health in Vermont, and I'm also a board member of the Vermont Public Health Association. I have some colleagues with me today, both members of the Public Health Association and members of the Department of Health. So the title of today's presentation is It Starts with Community, Vermont Perspectives on Healthy Community Design. We're going to talk about some Vermont success stories, and I bet you're going to be surprised by some of what you hear. The healthy community design concept is ingenious because it's endlessly flexible. It's widely used by health professionals and planners in a variety of contexts. According to the Centers for Disease Control, your address can play an important role in how long you live and how healthy you are. The physical design of your community affects your health every time you step out your front door. Sometimes making healthy choices is not easy. Being physically active is hard if you do not have access to sidewalks or parks, and eating right is hard if healthy foods are not available. Therefore, healthy community design can be very effective in addressing the following issues: adult and childhood obesity, risk of heart disease, high blood pressure, and diabetes, air pollution, tobacco use, traffic injuries, community cohesion, crime, and safety. Here are three main themes of today's webinar that you'll want to keep in mind: community, sustainability, and affordability. The second two themes depend entirely on the first one, community. When communities come together and harness their energies, great things happen. Healthy community design isn't about major infrastructure projects. Small, inexpensive changes can have significant positive impacts too. Each community decides what its goals are. When decisions are jointly made, responsibility is jointly felt and shared. This makes projects not only affordable, but more importantly, it makes them sustainable. We'd like to pause to acknowledge our sponsors. This webinar is a production of the Vermont Public Health Association in partnership with the Vermont Department of Health, and it was funded through the American Public Health Association and the Centers for Disease Control. Here's how today's webinar will run. First, because we're conscious of your time and because we have a collection of really great community stories, we've created the bulk of our presentation in movie form. So we'll begin with our first presentation in just a minute or so, and this will be some thoughts about healthy community design from Heidi Klein and Suzanne Kelly from the Vermont Department of Health and from the Public Health Association, as well as some community health promotion folks around the state. Next, we'll pause for questions and discussion, and then we'll highlight 4 of the many exciting stories here in Vermont. So this will be our 15-minute presentation, the second presentation. And at the conclusion of the second presentation, which will be in the form of a small movie, we'll have additional time for questions and answers with myself, Suzanne, and Heidi. So please join us for that. In the meantime, if you have questions as we go through and you'd like to submit your questions, please do it via the WebEx text function on the right-hand side of your screen.
I am Suzanne Kelly, and I am the Healthy Communities Coordinator at the Vermont Department of Health. We are working to help create communities where people have access to be physically active and to eat healthy foods. There's a range of ways that we do that, from grants to communities to collaborating with regional planning commissions and the Department of Transportation. So there's bottom-up and there's top-down initiatives going on. It's definitely about starting to build capacity within communities so they can really do this work. There's 4 areas that we're funding communities to be mobilizing around: increasing bicycle and pedestrian access, increased mixed-use development, improving parks, recreation, and open space, and increasing access to healthy food.
What the Healthy Community Design movement is about is recognizing that we made very purposeful choices about how we grew our communities, mainly, through the 60s, 70s, 80s, where we were focused on accommodating cars and commerce instead of people. And so it's saying, well, let's look at what we knew in the past worked. What about our vibrant town centers, and how do we think about that as we continue to change and grow over time? Because so much of what the healthy community design concept is about is how do you look at your infrastructure and your policies. So if you have your policies in place when we are doing new construction, when we are having new development, when we're setting up our schools or our communities, we're going to say that one of their values or goals is that this be a walkable community, that this be a bikeable community.
Our goal is to see these sustainable changes. Some of it is boring stuff for sure. I mean, it's things like a town plan now has language to support health and wellness. But the effect of that is that with all new development, they have to consider the impact of health in anything they do. So it sounds kind of boring, like, oh, a town just changed their town plan, but the result of that is really important. There are a lot of communities that are getting that health language into their town plans now, which I think is really a starting point. The next piece is for coalitions and community members to know that language is there and to make sure the town follows through.
Our towns actually, in large part, have fabulous planning and policy tools available to them because of our local land use and state land use policies. When we're passing our road and bridges and state transportation or our local transportation budgets, which they have to do yearly, is someone saying, so what percent of that is going to go into bicycle paths? What percent of that is going to go into sidewalks? Where's that long-range plan for our pedestrian infrastructure? We make decisions every year about where we're going to put our money. I think that we have the tools. It's just using them. It's part of our roads funds. It's part of our community taxes. It's part of our school funding. It's already embedded there. It's just making it a priority and a way of thinking.
It's really about what do we want our community to look like? What's important? There's a lot of advocates for this kind of work who talk about physical activity and healthy eating being engineered out of our lives. And so now we're working toward re-engineering it back into our lives.
One of the keys to building a better community is putting people first. In any community, cars and other forms of transportation are always going to play a role. But if you want a community to come alive, you have to make cars secondary and put people first.
The key thing is, I think you can have healthy community design without saying you can't develop. So I don't think the question is should we or shouldn't we develop, because the reality is we probably will. What I hope people will do is say, if we are going to develop, how are we going to do it in a way that promotes our community values? So it's not should you, it's how should you, or how can you?
Active transportation needs to become kind of the way of doing things. Baby steps. So, you kind of have to create that shift in incremental ways. But yeah, I think you get a lot of excitement when you get people out on that trail and everyone walking to school, and it really energizes people. And then, you create your school travel plan and you make it the easier choice.
At the end of the day, if you can bring it back to something as simple as we want our community to be a healthy place to raise kids, you're going to find that no one disagrees with that.
Hi, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed that movie. We're coming back in now to our webinar. If you're trying to find your way back in, just go down to the bottom of your screen and click on your WebEx tab. So once again, this is Tracy Dolan from the Vermont Department of Health. And we wanted to pause for a few minutes here and give anyone who's joining us late a chance to catch up, and second, to answer any questions you have so far. I don't know if any questions have come in. We'll check as I continue to discuss. So let's recap some of the ideas we've just heard. Healthy community design is about access to healthy foods and healthy activities, collaboration with a variety of parties. If you're not sure where to start, try one of these: local state health office, regional or local planning commissions, local Department of Transportation, local recreation department, or town officials. Or contact Suzanne Kelly here at the Health Department. And you've got her email there, suzanne.kelly@state.dc.us. She's our in-house expert on healthy community design. Choices. We make choices all the time about our communities. This is about being an active part of that process. So process. This is a process of looking at local policies to see what works now, what worked in the past, what we like, and what we'd like to change. And it's about putting language into your town's plan or making sure that the town follows through on the language that's there. Tools. We have them already. In many cases, they're just waiting to be used. Adding, not subtracting. It's about improvements, not contention. It's about adding value and enjoyment to community life. This is actually something I've learned a lot about from my colleague Heidi Klein. Heidi, did you want to talk a little bit about what it means to add and not subtract when we talk about healthy community design?
Sure. In Vermont, we're blessed with a really wonderful policy framework for local land use development, and I think we have a lot of people who put a lot of energy into creating the infrastructure based on a commitment to our downtowns and our vibrant lives. Vermonters share a passion for healthy living and for vibrant downtown communities. And so while the policy infrastructure is in place, we as public health advocates don't necessarily participate always in our local land use planning. And so we have embarked upon a plan for the last 5 years to really invest in making sure that the public health community and others see the intersection between our vibrant local food economy, our downtown communities, and public health outcomes. And so we are joining as partners in some of the work that's already been done around smart growth and vibrant communities. And we are trying to say, look, what we do for economic development is also good for health. What is good for health is good for our children. It's good for our long-term sustainability. So we see it as a way of converging on our common goals here in Vermont.
Thank you very much, Heidi. It's also about setting priorities. Setting priorities. Healthy community design means looking at each local community through the lens of health. And it can be difficult because there can often be a lot of things you want to do, and sometimes it's really about starting small. Finally, it's about consensus. Consensus is about making decisions as a community as to what's best for each individual community's health. And this can be an interesting process because sometimes it's difficult to get consensus. And so that's where really the community work comes in, and that's where sometimes it takes a little more time to build that glue. If there are no questions, we're going to move on into our next section. So let's hear about healthy community design in action. The following are 4 case studies in how, when you activate a community, great things can happen. This next movie will last approximately 15 minutes. And when I give us the countdown to watch it, you're just going to click on the second of the 2 links. So I've just resent that link. And it's down in the right-hand box on your screen. And in the meantime, if you have questions, use the text function to type them. We'll capture them and we'll talk about them at the end of the presentation. But this is the part where you're going to hear from Vermonters and their real experiences with this process.
My name is Hillary Boone, and I am the program director at the Milton Community Youth Coalition. We focus a lot on helping people stay healthy and substance-free. And recently, we've been working a little bit more on making the community a healthy place for both kids and adults. The more resources and tools and structure that people have to make healthy choices, and the more community support, the more likely they are to choose the right thing. We received a grant from the Vermont Department of Health to increase residents of Milton's access to healthy food. So the first thing that we did was we pulled together everyone who was interested in working together, and we ended up with a group of about 14 committed community members. We used a results-based accountability model for the first stages of the project, which is really a way to step back and say, what does a healthy Milton look like to us? We started to work on some initiatives. The first one, and probably the one with the biggest scope, was revitalizing the farmers market. We changed the farmers market a lot. For years, it had been at the Grange on Saturdays all day. As a task force, we came in, we surveyed the town, and we moved it to the Milton High School 4 to 7 on Thursday nights. Before we knew it, we had $1,000 coming from the family practice in Fletcher Allen so that we could get $5 coupons to our market in the hands of people going to the food shelf. It's just little things like that that create a buzz. People wanted to come and play music at the markets. People wanted to showcase their nonprofits at the markets. Then it became a place to be, and it just took off from there. We started community dinners quarterly at the school. Last time we served 400 people. There hasn't been a big tradition of that in Milton, and historically sometimes we really have trouble pulling people together for an event, and people don't necessarily turn out to a movie at the library, but we all love food. And so we started doing community dinners at the school as a way to showcase the food and get people who aren't in the elementary and middle school otherwise into the school, seeing all the great work that's being done. The food is good, the vibe is good, and people keep coming back. through the task force that we pulled together, the school made a lot of connections with local farmers. And so a lot of time the food is donated or sponsored or available locally at a really good price. And they're popular. We stopped doing them for the summer, and we had a lot of calls about when the next one was going to happen.
My name is Amy Brewer. I'm a health educator at Northwestern Medical Center in St. Albans. The field I work with is health education, health promotion, really looking at what supports healthy decisions, no matter what the topic is. You can't impact the community with education alone, one person at a time or one student at a time, one class at a time. If that's not embedded in something that supports healthy decision making, then it's not going to work. We've worked with Swanton from 2006 until 2011. And we really looked at the assets in the community. We worked with the key players in the community, anybody who was interested, and started to lay groundwork for building a recreation path. We, as a community, came together to build it. And the beauty is it goes right by the elementary schools, so it's a very easy and actually faster route to the schools on foot. It goes right next to the recreation fields. We put in some beautiful signs, and we left the town enough money to continually replace them. The school started using it for different classes or walk-to-school events or all-school walks. One of the beautiful stories of Swanton is they've really adopted that identity and have put up signs in all their parks that they are smoke-free parks. And everybody you talk to in Swanton identifies that it's really well used. One of the important things about Fit and Healthy Swanton is we worked really hard with the people in the community to adopt these changes, to make significant infrastructure changes so that when the funding stopped, and the funding did stop in 2011, all the important pieces were in play and they would help perpetuate a healthy community. The changes that we made are sustained changes. They'll be there forever. Getting the community members, the community leaders involved is very intentional for a variety of reasons. If we hadn't come out on volunteer days with tools to help clear this overgrown railroad bed, if we hadn't all gotten out on those paths together, I think the community wouldn't have owned it. When we share the solutions, people are invested in them so that it becomes their solution instead of my solution.
My name's Courtney McKegg. I am a coordinator for the Mount of Scuttney Prevention Partnership. I think that the Healthy Community Design offers a process to assess what towns are doing well and areas that they want to address. I really appreciate this process because it allows for residents to be involved. Youth can be involved, seniors can be involved, anybody who's interested. I do have a success here in West Windsor where a new trail was built, so an off-road access between Ascutney Mountain and the downtown part of West Windsor. And that was a huge partnership between many different organizations. That started with 12 youth who were involved with a walkability assessment that I did. I asked 4th, 5th, and 6th graders if they'd like to take a look at how walkable the village of Brownsville was, and they were willing to take their recess time to come with me and actually walk in the downtown village and do a 5-point assessment, looking at driver behavior, sidewalk condition, crosswalks, and then they took that to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission was very impressed, really liked to hear from the youth, and there were some areas of concern in terms of connectivity and how do you get to the mountain safely. There's our West Windsor Town Forest, which is a phenomenal opportunity for recreation, trails, mountain biking, hiking, skiing, but there really wasn't a safe and defined route there. There's no crosswalks in town. The trail took a few weeks of volunteer time. Just about 2 weeks ago, we had our second kind of kickoff event to promote safe routes to school, and we all gathered at the top of the trailhead on Ascutney Mountain and walked to school together on this trail. Interestingly, one of the students He's a sixth grader, was walking his two twin sisters who were in third grade to school the other day, and I happened to see him come right up to the crosswalk, and I stopped, and another car came around and stopped on the other side, and he crossed that, and I saw him later that day, and I was like, how proud are you, to have created that opportunity? And through his work and the work of many of his community members and neighbors, what was identified as a need was then remedied and turned into a crosswalk and creating a safe route for him to get to school.
My name is Jason Van Drysch. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Education and the Interim Co-Executive Director for Local Motion. When people start thinking about healthy community design, the first thing their mind usually goes to is, oh, we need to build this path, or we need to connect that sidewalk. Those are all true, but it skips right over what I think is the more important question to ask, which is, what's going on in our community that's impeding it from being a healthy community, and how can we take those things out of the equation? What people find as they start to look at communities that way is that healthy community design is a lot less expensive than you think. One really great example comes from New York City, where the city has replaced little patches of asphalt and they've transformed them into public plazas, community parks. Initially, they've done it often just with a few buckets of paint and some lawn chairs and some big planters with plants in them. Out of nowhere, bang, people show up. And it's a park simply because they changed the rules about what that space was for. And it didn't require anything fancy, didn't require anything expensive. All it required was changing the use of the place from cars to people. And it's amazing what a transformation that can cause. If when you think about roads and streets, you only think about transportation, you're selling yourself short. Roads and streets are about so much more than transportation. They are our public living rooms. They're where we come out and interact with each other. One great example here in Burlington that's relevant to communities all over the state. A couple years ago, Local Motion worked with the Department of Public Works to redesign Colchester Avenue, which is a major 4-lane street where you kind of held tight to the steering wheel as you drove along it because there was no margin for error. And if you were on a bike, either you didn't use that street at all, or you biked as fast as you possibly could because there was somebody right on your tail. It had a high crash rate and was a street that people routinely complained about as being a place where they didn't like to drive. And what they realized is that having a 4-lane street was actually not the best use of that asphalt, and that what would serve everybody better was to redesign it as a 3-lane street with bike lanes on either side. And that did a lot of things. For drivers themselves, it meant that people who were waiting to make left-hand turns were in that middle left-hand turn lane instead of sitting there in a through lane hoping they weren't going to get rear-ended. And for people who were driving straight through, there wasn't all that jockeying lane to lane where you're risking a side swipe and somebody might be in your blind spot. On the bike side, it gave bikes their own separate space so they weren't in conflict with cars. Public Works did this restriping, and they did a really careful job of tracking both how's traffic doing, is it still flowing, and also looking at crashes. And what they found is that traffic did just as well after they went from 4 lanes to 3, and that crashes went way, way down. And that made it just such an easy sell. It wasn't somebody losing so somebody else could win. It was a rethinking of the street so it worked better for everybody.
Communities that are built with the values that we care about, walkability, local connections, those actually are more financially viable than those that aren't. Realtors are putting walkability indexes when they're rating homes for sale because that's what people want. That's what's selling. It's a good economic investment. It's also good for our health, and it's good for our community.
I really like that over time, some really significant and sustainable change is happening in communities. And you're definitely starting to see a shift toward going back to these really nice downtowns. And I think there's a few things that are contributing to that, honestly. I do think part of it is the aging population who's not wanting to live out in the suburbs anymore, not wanting to go into nursing homes or ready to. And I think that younger generations coming up also really value that. They also don't want to be driving 10 miles to get into town to go out at night. Part of it is environmental issues. And now there's definitely this more idea of this complete streets, really trying to develop in a way that will accommodate all users.
We have to be flexible and recognize, the reality is the majority of change in our communities does not come because the health department puts out a grant. The majority of change comes because there are people in their communities who care about their communities, care about their children or their parents or whatever, and they decide to get organized and make something great happen.
I see where it's going, and it's really exciting.
It can feel like your hands are tied sometimes when you're looking at a problem like this in your community, you know, like watching the farmers market dwindle. A lot of it isn't as complicated as we think it is. At some point, you just go with it. And when the energy is there and people are working together and their ideas are being heard and actualized, one thing just adds on to the next and it really snowballs.
We're hoping to enhance the number of kids who can walk. So the next steps are creating a school travel plan, seeing your neighbors, being out in your community, having safer roads, slowing traffic down, eliminating the environmental impacts of having many vehicles driving to school. There's a lot of benefits to it.
There is this common bond that we have. And if we can recognize that that's what we're really talking about, is helping to design our communities, either through our policies or our physical infrastructure, to maintain the quality of life that we all hold so dear, I think we can come together.
Being really genuine and authentic and having the community's best interest in mind, and people learn to trust you. And that's the cool thing I think about Vermonters, I think about people in the U.S. is once they get to know you, every preconceived notion melts away. And they are really genuinely open to connecting and working as a team.
We have the ability to do those small things that are about contributing to our community life that really are not controversial.
Because that's really all you can do. You can look at all the big picture problems of the world and feel overwhelmed, but if you take care of your corner, and everyone just took care of their corner, we'll slowly but surely, hopefully, improve.
Hi, everyone. I think some of you are just finishing up our second and last movie today. In order to come back into our webinar, look for the tab at the bottom of your screen, again, that says Cisco WebEx, and hopefully you're coming back onto our screen and you can see Healthy Community Design in action. So we did receive a couple of questions, and I'm going to ask Heidi Klein and Suzanne Kelly to repeat the questions and then give the answer to everyone. Let's go ahead and start with Suzanne. First, I think there was a question around funding and how does funding work for these kinds of projects?
Hello, everybody. This is Suzanne Kelly. I am the Healthy Communities Coordinator at the Vermont Department of Health. And yes, a question came in around funding for bicycle and sidewalk projects. In Vermont, we do a very good job of collaborating with partners. So certainly folks can contact me to find out different resources, but other possibilities to find funding would be through the Department of Transportation. They have a bike and pedestrian program coordinator there. They have transportation enhancement grants that sometimes can support those sorts of projects. The Safe Routes to Schools project in Vermont often will fund projects between schools and communities. The Vermont Department of Health uses funding that we get in part from the Federal Community Transformation Grant that helps fund some of the community organizing projects around these healthy community design initiatives. And also a really good resource for folks is to look to your regional planning commissions. They often get announcements of funding for infrastructure type projects that could be used within your communities for these types of things.
Okay, great. Now we're going to move to Heidi. And she's going to talk a little bit about the question of the movies. Some people asked us some questions about these movies.
Hi, this is Heidi Klein. I am a member of the Board of Directors of the Vermont Public Health Association, who sponsored this video and chat today. And we were lucky enough to find a great local resource called Shadow Productions. And they were the ones who came back to us with this very creative idea of a way to capture and disseminate the stories that they heard from our community partners. So we really credit Shadow Productions for putting this together for us. Basically just creating a space for us on YouTube and posting a movie. If you want more information about that and the content process, the process, it's www.shadowprod.com.
Thank you. And again, a reminder as we just move into the last part of our presentation that this was made possible by a grant from the American Public Health Association, small grants that were made available to public health associations to really promote some of the key concepts behind the CDC Community Transformation Grants. So we chose the issue of healthy community design. So to recap, healthy community design, in a word, is doable. It's not necessarily about having to get a big grant to do something huge. Small things can make a big difference. And it literally does start with the smallest conversations. You don't have to be a policy expert, and you don't have to devote all of your precious free time to a project. You start with small, good ideas that the community can coalesce around. Jason from Local Motion talked about how a little paint can change things dramatically. As we saw, with a little planning and a creative design, you can have a street that works better for cars, bikes, and pedestrians. But that's not all you can do with paint. For instance, Jason also had a great story about how New York City is transforming patches of unused asphalt into miniature parks. All it takes is paint, planters, and a few chairs, and suddenly people show up. Hillary Boone and the Milton Community Youth Coalition created community dinners in Milton that are attended by some 400 residents. Dinners where people meet, talk, brainstorm, and perhaps most of all, just enjoy being a community. Courtney McCaig from the Mount Ascutney Prevention Partnership took grade schoolers for a walk to assess the walkability of local streets. So you have these tiny urban planners not only impressing town officials with their findings, but learning from a very young age the importance of connected communities and that they can play a direct part in creating them. Talk about empowerment. This isn't about projects going away when a grant goes away. It's more akin to the idea of seed money. In Milton, the newly popular farmers market has gained sufficient support from the community to make it profitable and the place to be for residents. The community dinners are sustained in part by donations from local farmers. In West Windsor and Swanton, residents, second homeowners, and other volunteers pitched in with time and materials to create paths, and people of all ages are using them, not just for recreation, but for transportation. And of course, active transportation is such an important part of healthy community design, because what's better than getting your workout while you're out getting to work or school? So healthy community design is local. As we heard in all 4 case studies, these are local solutions to local problems. Healthy community design is a national and international concept, but it's implemented on a very local basis, where residents can experience the benefit of their efforts and see that they can make a difference. One community at a time, each designing their surroundings the way they see best. Healthy community design is collaborative. Amy Brewer from Northwestern Medical Center discussed how projects happen due to a combination of key players, community assets, and community desires. Hillary Boone emphasized the importance of respecting all opinions and of using a process whereby all voices are heard. So how do you get started? Whether you're a community group, a town employee or elected official, a town or regional planner, or an interested citizen with an idea, guess what? People want to hear from you, because if you have a good idea, chances are someone else has either had it or is going to love your idea. So you can start by contacting someone from this list. And I know all over the country you may have your own list. Your local or state health office, your regional or local planning commission, your local department of transportation, recreation departments, town officials. Or start by inviting a couple of people over for coffee. It's really that simple. If you're looking for a framework to help conceptualize your ideas, or you're looking for a better way to work with your local community, the best place to start is with a booklet called Active Living and Healthy Eating from the Vermont Department of Health. In it, you'll find information about the land use process, a list of steps to creating a healthy community, action strategies, and a toolkit. In addition, there's a lot of information regarding healthy community design on the website of the Centers for Disease Control. It's at www.cdc.gov/healthy-places. Here you can find information on how to conduct a health impact assessment, fact sheets on a host of health-related topics, stories from the field, accomplishments, and resources. So we hope these great stories have gotten you excited about the possibilities of healthy community design. And on a personal note, I really appreciate that you stuck with us and used the movie piece. We were a little nervous about that. Mostly I was a little nervous about that. But I think it really worked, and I'm excited, and I really do want to give another shout-out to Shadow Productions for helping us with that. And again, thanks to American Public Health Association, and thanks to the Vermont Public Health Association and the great partnership with the Vermont Department of Health. And for those of you wondering where you'll find the entire webinar online, you will in a couple of weeks find it online at the at the Vermont Public Health Association's website. We will place it there. In the meantime, I'm sending you now the 2 links in case you want to just use those YouTube movies for your own purposes to promote healthy community design. You are welcome to use them. And thank you so much for joining us. And good luck with all of your healthy community design plans.